If I can be fired for criticizing a foreign government, calling attention to a genocide, and using my academic expertise as an anthropologist to draw attention to how power operates, then no one is safe. Those are the words of Professor Maura Finkelstein, Associate Professor of Anthropology at Muhlenberg College in Pennsylvania. She is the author of The Archive of Loss, Lively Ruination in Mill Land, Mumbai, and she joins me on the line. Thanks so much for being here, Professor.
Thanks so much for having me. It's an honor.
For those who don't know, what is Muhlenberg College like? Where is it? What is it?
Yeah, it's a small private college in Allentown, Pennsylvania, so eastern Pennsylvania, about an hour outside of Philadelphia. And I taught there for 9 years before I was fired in May of 2024. I'm in my appeals process now. And it's, you know, a seemingly normal private college within the landscape of American academia.
Uh-huh.
But what's interesting about Muhlenberg is that it also has a very large, I think like 33% Jewish population, which is very large for the United States. And a majority of those students are recruited through Halel International. And so the college
Oh,
also identifies itself because Hillel is a Zionist organization, as a safe space for Zionists. And the college has a
you mean it
very
officially?
Hillel International on their,
Yeah.
the Muhlenberg Hillel on their website. The director says this is a safe place for Zionists. It's
Oh,
a direct quote.
okay.
So it's an interesting place to have worked as an anti-Zionist Jew.
But I also see that it has evangelical, like Lutheran
It was, yeah,
university.
I mean, a lot of these colleges started with like a religious foundation. It's technically a Lutheran college. There is a chaplain who, starts our faculty meetings. But aside from that, it's not a religious school, but it does have a very large Jewish population. Percentage wise, it's in the top five of American colleges and universities.
Okay, and what were you teaching there at Muhlenberg?
I am an anthropology professor, so I was in a very tiny department of sociology and anthropology. There were three anthropologists, or there are three anthropologists and two sociologists. And so, because we're so small, I was a generalist. I taught classes, intro classes, classes on theory and methodology. I taught
Mhm.
classes on borders and migration and queer anthropology, and I taught a class on Palestine.
Okay, so you taught about Palestine in the
Mhm.
classroom. Did you ever face any sort of scrutiny because of that, or any pushback or anything?
Yeah, nothing that ever seemed too concerning. Um, I, since I started teaching in 2012, I was a adjunct, so not a permanent, sort of like a lecturer, a yearly lecturer position, for 3 years at a small college in Oakland, California, Mills
Hmm.
College.
Hmm.
And I taught there for 3 years, and then I taught at Muhlenberg for 9 years. And throughout those 12 years of teaching, I always included material on Palestine in my classes. It's just something that I feel ethically inclined to do since I teach about power and settler colonialism and empire. And I had never really had any institutional concern. There had been concerns from Hillel International and Zionist students in the past, but nothing that I would have thought would be a direct threat to my job until after October 7th, 2023.
Can you just, for people who don't know,
Mhm.
give a sort of brief description of what Hillel is? Because it's on a lot of university campuses. We have them here in Toronto also. What
Yeah.
what is Hillel?
So Halal International is a really interesting organization because, like a lot of Zionist organizations in the United States and North America, across the world, it is an organization that claims to be the center of Jewish life for college and university students, but it actually is an explicitly Zionist organization. So I won't bore your listeners too much, but it was founded in 1923 as a Jewish organization on campus to sort of deal with the isolation of minority Jewish students on campuses, to sort of provide a Jewish space. And it was that up until around 1980. And around 1980, Hillel started being, or it was expanded as an international organization that was centralized. And then there would be all of these campus chapters. And as Hillel International leadership sort of shored up power, it became explicitly Zionist through both leaders, the presidents of Hillel, and also through funding. And
Right, I
so
was going to ask you that.
yeah.
How does it get its funding?
Yeah. So beginning in the 1980s until the present moment, you start seeing really big Zionist donors contributing to Hillel International. You start seeing the development of what Hillel calls Hasbara Fellowships, which are actually supported by the Israeli government, which are fellowships that bring North American, international Jewish college students to Israel to learn how to be an advocate for the Israeli state on their home campuses. I think it's now maybe 95 campuses in North America have an Israel fellow who is a former Israeli soldier who comes to campus for a fellowship period in which they help college students develop a relationship with Israel through the sort of framework of the military. Like right now, the Baruch College, so part of the college and universities of New York, the CUNY New York system, Baruch College actually has a Hillel on base. So they actually have American Jewish college students who have been in Gaza helping with military operations, helping with genocide there. So you see this organization go from being about the Center for Jewish Life to being an explicitly Zionist organization that determines how and who can be Jewish. So, as part of their sort of tenets of partnership, if you're involved with Halel International, you cannot sponsor a speaker who supports boycott, divestment, and sanctions. It is prohibited. And so in the past, when I have, brought a Palestinian speaker to campus or taught about Palestine, students from Hillel who have, either done Hasbara fellowships or have been trained in a particular kind of way are often on the forefront of attacking those speakers, sort of trying to shut down classes. And we see that across North America.
They've been very successful over the past 16
months. They've been very successful. Yeah. And it's really insidious because Hillel is an organization that we should all be drawing attention to and critiquing because of its explicit Zionist stance and the way in which they are sort of on the front lines of aligning American Jews and North American Jews, Canadian Jews with Zionism. But any criticism of Hillel is charged with anti-Semitism, which is quite the move.
It's interesting also because Hasbara Fellowships, which also operates here in Canada, you don't have to be Jewish to go on that fellowship, from what I've learned, because the head of it here wasn't Jewish actually at one time.
That's interesting.
Was a Christian Zionist. I think the operative word is just Zionist. You don't necessarily have to be Jewish. I
think that's, I just want to sort of jump on that. So Hillel is a Jewish Zionist organization, but, in North America, the large percentage of Zionists are Christian Zionists, evangelical Zionists, and they also have within their own organizations, Hasbara fellowships as well. So there's an interesting partnership between Jewish Zionist organizations and Christian Zionist organizations that I would argue would be part of the far right.
Okay. We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to get to your persecution and attempts at dismissal here on campus. From what I've read, this was you were first come after because of a temporary post on a story slide. You had put up something that Palestinian poet Remy Ghanazi wrote, and I'm quoting here: "Do not cower to Zionists, shame them, do not welcome them in your spaces. Why should these genocide-loving fascists be treated any different than any other flat-out racists. So you had put this on a story on Instagram. And so what happened after that?
Yeah, and I'll just take a step back and say
Sure.
that was, I think I posted that, I should have the dates memorized, but it was either January 17th or 18th of 2024.
Yeah, I have here
Yeah.
January 17th,
Thank you.
2024. Yeah.
And then I think the charge, the sort of complaint against me was filed on the 18th. But this surveillance and harassment began as early as October 12th, 2023. And I think, I want to preface this by saying that my case and my story has gotten a lot of attention, both because I'm a tenured professor and also because I'm a Jewish professor. But what we're seeing across North America, and just looking at North America and not even thinking about what's happening in Europe, and also in Israel as well, is that faculty, staff, and students who speak out in support of Palestinian liberation, against genocide, and against the state of Israel and Zionism, are being attacked on so many different levels. And a lot of those faculty and staff who are losing their jobs are contingent faculty, they're staff members who don't have the protection of tenure. And so, my story is just one of many, 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 many stories, except the perceived safety of tenure and the perceived safety of being Jewish sort of converge in this way that this story has sort of garnered attention in ways that other people's stories haven't. So like many of my colleagues and comrades across North America, after October 7th, the fact that I had already been involved in teaching, writing, speaking out on, against Israel's genocide, which has been happening since 1948, and in support of a liberated Palestine. And because Halel had already had me on their radar, I had first a student file a complaint about my teaching because I contextualized.
This is back in October 2023.
This is in October. And that was a case that didn't really go anywhere. And then there was concerns about some of my publications. In particular, I think the one that was most upsetting to some Halel students was an essay I wrote called Never Again Means Never Again for Anyone, which I know, which actually I was accused of Holocaust denial because I suggested that there are multiple genocides that have been committed. I mean, genocide is an element of settler colonial violence. And so, the Holocaust is not the only genocide, as we know, that has ever happened. And I dare to suggest that no one should experience genocide or be the victim of genocide. And that was egregious. And then in late October, my social media started to be a concern. And, I want to put this in the context of the college administration was under a lot of pressure from donors, from alumni, from students, from parents, because, and, I think this is the same in Canada, in the United States, federal funding of higher education has been so badly eroded that most colleges and universities, even if they're supposedly public, rely on donor money in order to function. And so at a small college like Muhlenberg, where you're donor and tuition driven, if you have some of your biggest donors and supporters making threats, fire this person or else we pull our money, that's a really, I'm not defending the college administration, but that is a big threat. And so I think the college administration was under a lot of pressure to get rid of me. And so what felt like a sort of weekly, like every week a new allegation seemed to come up until I posted this post by Remy Kanazi, and because the grown adults that work for Halel International had been surveilling my social media, taking screenshots of what I'd been posting, putting them in a WhatsApp group to Hillel student leadership and encouraging students to be concerned about this. So one student in Hillel leadership filed an equal opportunity non-discrimination policy complaint against me, claiming that because the student identified as a Zionist, and that was their protected class, like race,
That's
national
yeah, and
origin.
yeah. I have a lot of questions about that
Yeah,
coming up.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That the student felt like, even though I have never to this day met the student argued that I was denying them access to an education because they wouldn't feel safe or comfortable taking my class, considering the fact that I was, criticizing Zionism and Zionist, which is a political ideology and
Hmm.
not a protected identity.
I want to come back to what you just mentioned about this safe space and certain students saying that they don't feel comfortable. I found this change.org petition that they had launched against you, which garnered 8,000 signatures, asking, and this again, I'm quoting here, that Muhlenberg College must remove Professor Finkelstein for dangerous pro-Hamas rhetoric, accuses you of blatant classroom bias against Jewish students. As you pointed out, you're a Jewish professor. Can you talk to me about what that feels like? I mean, being Jewish, being accused of blatant bias against other Jews, and then this persecution and accusations and censoring of Jewish voices that we're seeing right now. Never mind other people's voices, but particularly Jewish voices.
Yeah, so one of the things that's been particularly interesting and also unsettling is that, I've been what I understood later to be an anti-Zionist since I was 16. And I came to that term in 20 years ago in 2004 when I was actually a master's student at Columbia University, also at the center of, all of these stories in which a Palestinian professor, Joseph Massad, was being attacked by an organization that since has been absorbed into Halel International, a project called the David Project. And it was through organizing with Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, anti-Zionist students on behalf of this professor who was being attacked for, these fictitious claims of anti-Semitism, that I was sort of radicalized into campus organizing. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I've been watching this for 20 years now, just in terms of what's happening on our college campuses. And so this wasn't new, but I
Right.
think the scale of, and I hesitate to use the word violence because despite the ceasefire, a genocide in Gaza is still happening. And we've watched, what is it now, 16 months of the absolute worst violence that I have ever seen or
I
could
think
imagine in my
any of
life.
us have ever seen. Yeah.
It's beyond my capacity.
Yeah.
So when I say, violent language, I did, because of this petition, I have, received death threats, rape threats, et cetera, et cetera. It's language. It's not, I have not actually like experienced physical violence, but all of it is coming from Jewish Zionists.
Yeah.
I would say, or not all of it, like maybe 80% from Jewish Zionists who are revealing the violence of their ideology through the way that their like hatred and disdain and disgust to another Jewish person who does not support their genocidal ideology. I think that if Zionism was actually like a just and moral ideology, we would not be seeing Zionists actively trying to destroy anti-Zionists in the way that they are. It's such an existential threat to their entire project. So, having the petition, having these sort of hateful, voices in my email and on social media, et cetera, it shows me that, something that I've known for a very long time, that I think a lot of anti-Zionist Jews have known for a very long time, that there is something so unwell at the
Mm.
heart of so much of what it means to be Jewish today when it is, married with Zionism. I think Zionism has almost become a new religion within Judaism, in which
Wow.
the commitment to this ideology, this commitment to Israel, this commitment to a settler colonial genocidal way of understanding the world has almost, replaced any kind of spiritual or religious faith. And the way in which it's being defended, aside from genocide, is also the need to absolutely destroy anyone who would challenge it. It's so scary and disturbing. And we, of course, are seeing the most extreme version of this in Gaza.
I want to read something else that you said. You said, I wasn't fired for anything I said in the classroom. I was fired because of a charge brought by a student I had never met, let alone taught, who had been surveying my social media account for months. This isn't about student safety. This is about silencing dissent. We are witnessing a new McCarthyism, and we should all be terrified of its implications. What do you make of, and this is a broad question, of course, what do you make of the times that we're living in right now? Because people call me alarmist when I say things like this.
Yeah. I mean, the alarm has been going off for a very long time. And I think, we both live in settler colonies that have conducted their own and continue to conduct genocide against Native communities. And this, to me, is the culmination of settler colonial states that are built upon genocide, right? Like the way in which we have sort of contained so much of the ugliness of our countries of origin within this sort of black box that is surrounded by the perceived sense of democracy and open societies and multiculturalism. In some ways, I feel like the moment that we are witnessing right now is the inevitable conclusion of never actually dealing with the violence of the United States and Canada and how they've come to be. And so it makes perfect sense to me that from one settler colony to another, there is a need to absolutely protect the structures and ideologies that allow for that to come, because a free Palestine threatens the United States, a free Palestine threatens Canada, Australia, et cetera, et cetera. And so in some ways, I think every day I wake up and feel as though I'm completely unprepared for the hate and the violence that I am seeing erupting everywhere. And on the other hand, it's been bubbling up out of this black box for so long now that, of course, we are here in this moment in which we're also watching, complete climate collapse and disaster alongside incredible violence. So I think that what we are witnessing, especially in the United States after the most recent election, is that, of course, fascism was present under the Democrats and genocide was conducted with the funding of the Democrats. But what this new administration is really bringing about is fascism, and it will destroy everything in its way, and it is trying to do that.
Yeah, I'm going to come to that, to the new regime too. I want to come back to the academy though, this capital A academy, and the way we sort of tend to think of the academy as being removed from society. But in a lot of ways, we've watched this genocide play out, the pushback of it play out on university campuses. Can you talk to me a little bit about the campus as a site of social change and how you're seeing that eroded during this time?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated question because on the one hand, colleges and universities are institutions that reproduce the sort of logics of the settler states, the colonial states, the white supremacist capitalist states that they exist in. And, so our institutions are wildly uneven. They're hierarchical. This idea of who can excel in these structures and who can't is, of course, mapped onto race, gender, etc. But at the same time, there are spaces in which young people who, in theory, want to learn are coming together in great numbers. I think, we witness the best possibility of the college and university in the student encampments, in which you had these like radical spaces of learning and community. I think that's the best that colleges and universities have to offer. And we've seen, historically that our colleges and universities have both been that and both been spaces of reproducing power at the same time. What I think is so chilling about the way in which in North America right now, the crackdown on, this notion of academic freedom is leading to a purging of faculty, staff, and students, is that we have not seen such extreme versions of institutional control on our college campuses since the McCarthy years. And I think in some ways, what we're seeing now is worse.
Yeah, it just feels like that as you see students being expelled, professors, right? We've seen the Professor Franke at Columbia
Yeah.
University. I mean, it's just one after the other. And, tenure doesn't save you
Mm-mm.
anymore, right? At the same time, you're seeing students are being taught history, anthropology, social justice, human rights, and then they're expected not to put any of this into practice.
Right.
And that's the weird dichotomy that I'm really seeing. And then at the same time, you're seeing these Zionist students running to their deans and complaining that they don't feel safe.
And I'll say two things about that just really
Yeah.
quickly. I think in order for us to come to this moment, two things have happened. One is that because our colleges and universities have become these spaces of, accumulating wealth and, producing good workers, we have seen over the past few decades a defunding and devaluing of the liberal arts and a growing support for STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math. And with no shade to folks who want to go into STEM, you can't go into those fields without also having a foundation in the liberal arts, because the liberal arts is about creating a space to learn and teach critical thinking. And
Mm-hmm.
so what we're seeing is that what colleges and universities and their donors want to fund is disciplines that they believe will produce productive workers who will go into the workforce and participate in a particular kind of way. And so defunding the liberal arts has been a really devastating crush to what an education can be. And on the other hand, we're seeing at least 15-year in the United States. I don't know what's going on in Canada, but in the United States, we're seeing like a 15-year erosion of what Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 should be, which is the protection of, race, gender, ethnicity, et cetera, to the point in which if a professor is teaching what they're supposed to be teaching, critical thinking, challenging power, et cetera, a student can claim that their ideological identity, i.e., Zionism, is under attack and that they must be protected from the violence of unlearning a violent world order.
Isn't that
So,
what NYU did that, right?
yeah,
NYU did that
exactly.
this summer. NYU officially made Zionist a protected class.
Yeah.
And
And Harvard just
yes, I was just
instituted.
coming to that too, because my next question was going to be that just today, right? Harvard University announced that it has reached a settlement with some Jewish students. Is that Halel also that brought this case against
I
Harvard?
believe so.
Filed a lawsuit against the university for alleged negligence in addressing anti-Semitism on campus. But as part of that settlement, this is what is interesting. The university has adopted the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. For those who don't know, IRA is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and I wanted to ask you about that definition of IRA. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I have at least 2 points, we'll say. But I think, for folks, anti-Semitism is a real problem, just like racism, transphobia, homophobia, ableism, et cetera, et cetera. We need to find ways to build, spaces of protection and equity for vulnerable people and institutions that are trying to do that in good faith are very wary of the fact that when you define those things in a concrete sense, then it means that instead of taking each incident within the larger context that it exists, there's a really rigid way of determining whether or not a violation has happened, and that creates problems in every direction. These instances don't exist in a vacuum. They exist in their social context. And so the definition itself is a rigid way of determining something that, cannot be determined through a rigid definition. I'm repeating myself. But I think the thing that is so scary about the IRA definition is that it gives 11 examples of what constitutes anti-Semitism, and 6 of them are in some way related to critique of Israel or Zionism, which does 2 things. One, it explicitly links Judaism, Zionism, and the state of Israel as like a single identity. And it also, places critique of Israel and Zionism above the experience of being a Jew. So there's many, many, many ways to be a Jewish person. And the IRA definition forecloses so many of those ways and determines that if you criticize an ideology, a political ideology, or a nation state, you are probably anti-Semitic, which is how I'm an anti-Semite, according to,
it's the new definition. I want to draw out some of those definitions, though. I want to read them because it says one of them is, quote, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination. And this is the example they give, by claiming that the existence of the state of Israel is a racist endeavor. The other one that I wanted to draw out is applying double standards by requiring of it being Israel, again, a behavior not expected or demanded of another democratic nation. So, first of all, it says that Israel is a democracy, questionable. The other thing is that this is a big talking point that I see from Israeli government spokespersons, this idea that Israel is held to a different standard than other nations. Can you parse that out for me a little bit?
Yeah. So where to start? So I will say Israel is a racist endeavor. We can talk more about that, but that is, I would say a verifiable fact. I think this whataboutism is a strategy that Israel is constantly drawing upon. We are not as bad as China. What about China? We're not as bad as, Syria.
Our neighbors,
what about
all
Syria? Our neighbors. Yeah. And not only is that completely beyond the point, if we're actually talking about the state of Israel, we are talking about the state of Israel and what is happening because of, Israeli policy and the United States support for Israel and other partners as well. So I think it's just a distraction. It's a distraction that tries to pull attention away from the fact that the state of Israel has been committing genocide since its foundation. The state of Israel is a Jewish supremacist state, which borrows the logics of white supremacy in order to create what is most comparable to an apartheid state. These things are all happening. They've all been verified. We are seeing evidence of this every day. And so to say, well, it's anti-Semitic to draw attention to our horrific violence because there are other places that are also violent is, I was raised by a lawyer. that does not hold up in court.
Yeah.
I killed him, but I didn't kill him as violently as somebody else could have killed him.
Yeah. What's interesting also is, I'm from Iran. I'm Iranian. And whenever someone criticizes Iran, nobody calls it Islamophobia. Right? And these are the things that really jump out at me. But this is something else I found on IRA's website. It says, however, criticism of Israel similar to that leveled against any other country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic. But I kept wondering, what's interesting about that is that Israel isn't like any other country. So it just doesn't make sense, but it's been very effective. And I feel like, as you said, sort of we've watched this come at a head over the years. This didn't just start. And so you have this very contested, controversial definition that conflates being critical of Israel with anti-Semitism. But at the same time, there's numerous notable Jewish Holocaust professors, genocide studies professors who have really pushed back on this
Yeah.
definition. But then you see Harvard doubling down and adopting it. And as we said this summer, NYU included Zionists as a protected class of people. But people weren't losing their jobs for calling Rwanda a genocide or,
Of course
what
not.
the Khmer Rouge did in Cambodia, a genocide. Do you think that there will ever be a sort of reckoning of, among these academic institutions, or will this form of persecution just continue and become the new normal?
Yeah, I think that's a really hard question, and I have had a lot. I've talked a lot with some of my Palestinian friends over the past year and a half um, about the fact that because of the sort of normalization of Islamophobia and racism against Palestinians and Arabs in, the quote unquote Western world, it's almost hard to imagine the West ever taking responsibility, leveraging, their power to help rebuild, making reparations, apologizing, et cetera. Like in ways that we've seen multiple countries, especially Germany, trip over
Yeah,
itself
well,
to
yeah.
apologize for the Holocaust because of the whitening of European Jews. And I would say Israel is a major way in which that's happened. Um, the question of what will happen in terms of Palestine, what will happen in terms of Gaza. I think, you know, American colleges and universities who have not spoken out about the scholasticide in Gaza and the way in which so many American colleges and universities have direct ties to Israeli institutions and the government. We see one of the biggest pushes that students are demanding is to divest from Israel, to divest from weapons manufacturing. And the idea that our colleges and universities are not just benefiting from partnerships with Israeli universities that are used to control and surveil Palestinians as a part of a settler colonial project, but also that they are benefiting from weapons manufacturing should make all of our heads explode. Why are schools investing in weapons manufacturing? But we're seeing these direct ties. This has everything to do with these, global networks of capital. And so it's almost impossible to imagine what would need to change in order for these institutions to have anything to say about the
Mm.
last 15 months and what will happen in the future, despite the fact that every university in Gaza has been destroyed, libraries have been destroyed, not just people murdered and hundreds of
Professors killed.
thousands,
Yeah.
professors killed, but also, archives, documents, books, maps, records gone. And American colleges and universities have nothing to say about that.
But I mean, that is just that form of erasure is what colonial states do, right? They,
Exactly.
they need to do that. You mentioned, I just want to bring this up because you mentioned the relationship of universities
Yes, Maya
and
Maya Wynn's
I just
wonderful
want to
book.
I always push this. I think
Hmm.
everybody really needs to read this to understand how the academy is complicit in what is going on in Gaza and beyond, also in the occupied West Bank. As you mentioned, every single university in Gaza has been destroyed. There are tens of thousands of students who are again having no classrooms for the second year now. And we've seen the complete sort of silence from universities around the world
Yeah.
officially about this. And I kept thinking, what would have been the response if Russia had bombed out every single Ukrainian university?
Yeah.
The amount of scholarships that we would have seen, whole, housing devoted, bringing, students, I'm sure, from Ukraine over to finish their studies. I have no doubt that we would have seen all of that. Before I let you go, I have to ask you, as an anthropologist, what you made of Elon Musk's See Kyle on stage. That was day one of this new regime in the U.S. What did you make of it? What were your thoughts when you saw that?
Yeah, I mean, I think about how when people tell you who they are, listen to them. Elon Musk has been telling us that he's a fascist, that he is, I mean, he's a Zionist, he's a Nazi. He's been telling us all of these things. He endorsed the AFD in Germany. He hasn't been, at all quiet about this. He's, a person who has benefited greatly from South African apartheid. He is a transphobe. He is somebody who leverages hate and fear in order to profit. He, in some ways, even though it was like, oh my God, he actually did that, there's a part of me that's not surprised at
Mm.
all. And I say this not to say that I'm surprised, but I think what's most interesting about what happened is the way the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, tripped over
Wow.
itself to, as quickly as possible, or, excuse what is so clearly a Nazi salute. And, those of us who have been paying attention know that not only is the ADL a Zionist organization, but it's an organization that for at least, almost 100 years has been working hand in hand with law enforcement, with the FBI, to survey any, social justice movement, whether it be
Nelson
um,
Mandela.
yeah, whether it be like trying to destroy the civil rights movement in the United States, or destroy the farm workers movement, to destroy immigrant lives, queer people's lives, anti-Zionists, Palestinians, etc. I mean, the ADL has always been there. And in the way that, organizations like Halel and organizations like AIPAC have also, these Zionist organizations will partner with white supremacists. They will partner with anti-Semites
Wow.
if it leads to shoring up power to shut down critique of Israel and support for Palestine. That is a deal with the devil that they're very, very willing to do. So I think, Elon Musk told us exactly who he was, and the ADL has been telling us exactly who they are. So this is just a reminder to, the average person who maybe is hesitant to critique Zionist organizations, that this is not about protecting Jews. This is about protecting settler colonies. And if that means, partnering with right-wing fascist Nazis, then so be it. The big project is protecting a genocidal settler colony.
The other thing that Netanyahu came on and said Musk is a friend of Israel, and Musk came out and said, "Oh, I guess, I didn't know you could be a Nazi and a Zionist." And everybody just wrote, this, who wants to tell him first? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
there is so much, I laugh because I have to, otherwise I would be
Yeah,
crying,
sure.
uh, at the level of absurdity that we're seeing around us right now. Because, and at times I feel like that character in that movie, Life is Beautiful, who's doing the goose step and
Mm,
looking at his little kid and smiling. Because uh, this this egregious genocide that we're witnessing, it takes a village to sort of, get something like this going. And the participation of people who clapped at that Sieg Heil, I don't really think, and again, I sound alarmist, that people understand the road that we're going down and the way that they're participating in it. Professor Finkelstein, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much for having me. It was wonderful to be in conversation with you.
Thank
And,
you.
I hope all of these conversations are just moving us in a better direction towards liberation.
I hope so.